Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Hey YouTube, it's audio only today, so sit back and enjoy the sound, and let us know what you think of the episode.
Today, the Board of Peace takes Washington.
President Trump says board members have already pledged some $5 billion for rebuilding Gaza.
We look at who's in, who's out, and what it means for Gaza and the world. I'm Tamara Khandaker, and this is The Take. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode. What do you make of Trump's Board of Peace and the countries that have decided to stay out of it? If you're catching us on your podcast app, leave us a review telling us where you're listening from and give us a 5-star rating while you're there. It really helps the show.
I am Ali Harb. I am a journalist for Al Jazeera English, based here in Washington, D.C.
Ali, welcome back to The Take. You and I have talked so many times, but this is actually my first time filling in the host chair, so it's really nice to do this with a familiar face. I appreciate it, so welcome.
Thank you.
So today is the first meeting of Trump's so-called Board of Peace. It's happening in Washington, D.C. at the U.S. Institute of Peace, which I hear Trump has put his own stamp on.
Yeah, and officially, it's now the Trump Institute of Peace. He's put his name everywhere in the city. I wouldn't be surprised if I come into my building one day and it says Trump on the top.
Yeah, so this is the follow-up to last month's signing ceremony in Davos at the World Economic Forum. And why don't we start by just catching people up on what's happened since Davos and what we know about the Board of Peace that we didn't know at the time. What details have come into focus?
So this Board of Peace idea started with that 20-point so-called peace plan for Gaza that became the basis of the current, again, so-called ceasefire. We have to use a lot of quotation marks because of the difference between reality and what we are being told officially. Was announced in Davos, and initially it was seen as an idea as this Board of Peace would oversee the reconstruction of Gaza, but it's become clear over the past few weeks with the charter of the board leaked, and it doesn't mention Gaza, it mentions it as this peace body, that it will go beyond Gaza, that it will not just be about Gaza, but it will be as some sort of international organization that will oversee Trump's foreign policy, that will oversee conflict resolution from a Trump-led perspective. And you may think we already have a body for that, that is the United Nations, but it may be an alternative, an adjacent body to the United Nations with the United Nations-led like function, again, emphasizing led by Donald Trump himself.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the comparisons to the UN and the expansion of this mandate later on. But do you want to just tell us a bit about this meeting and sort of what are we expecting to see come out of this?
So we haven't heard a lot of details beyond what Trump himself has told us. And what Trump has told us is that countries are pledging $5 billion to humanitarian efforts and reconstruction in Gaza. So one would think that this will be the main focus of the meeting, as well as the International Stabilization Force, which is envisioned as an international police force, military police force that would deploy to Gaza. That will be another thing that I think the attendees will be discussing and looking to finalize and make concrete. So although we're talking about an expanded mandate of this Board of Peace, it does appear that this first meeting will be very much Gaza focused.
Mm-hmm. And what do you make of this $5 billion number? What do we know about how much it's actually going to cost to rebuild Gaza?
So from the United Nations and from the World Bank, we know that the reconstruction of Gaza will cost around $70 billion. And to understand why would it cost $70 billion, we have to envision a territory of 2 billion people, that's roughly the size of Detroit, Michigan, turned into dust. So $5 billion is a drop of the bucket. But there's also a concern over where is this $5 billion going? We don't have a draft resolution. So this is throwing $5 billion into an opaque fund that we truly do not know how is going to operate, right? So there's a lot of concern over where this money is going, but there's also a lot of concern over the amount of money, because $5 billion compared to the $70 billion needed just for reconstruction, we're not talking about the daily needs of the Palestinians in terms of humanitarian aid, medical aid, what they need to survive on a day-to-day basis. $5 billion is not a whole lot of money.
So there's a lot of questions still, but what we do know is what Jared Kushner's vision for Gaza is, right? Can you just tell us a bit about that? What is the vision that he's presented of what a reconstructed Gaza would look like?
Well, he presented this futuristic vision of the Gaza waterfront being populated by these skyscrapers that are out of a science fiction book.
We want to use free market economy principles. A lot of what President Trump spoke about that he's doing in America, we want to bring the same mindset and the same approach to a place like Gaza to give these people the ability to thrive and have a good life.
But Tamara, the discrepancy between these lofty visions of a futuristic city and what's going on the ground could not have been any larger, because on the ground you have Palestinians, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians living in tents that are being flooded every time it rains, living in accommodations where babies are dying of the cold, just in this desolate, apocalyptic landscape that has been turned into a wasteland by the Israeli military. So yeah, there's this difference between reality and the vision, and it's massive.
So this is happening as the U.S. is pushing forward phase 2 of its 20-point peace plan for Gaza. And there are about 24 countries that have signed up to be part of this Board of Peace. And what do we know about who's actually going to be at this meeting?
So the countries that have joined the Board of Peace, almost without exception, are very close allies of the United States, right? So you have Egypt, Jordan, traditional Middle East allies of the United States, Gulf countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE. You have Turkey, which is a NATO ally. In South America, you have Argentina, which is not just allied with the United States, but specifically allied with the Trump administration. Some former Soviet republics. One country that has raised eyebrows is Belarus, because Belarus is under a lot of Western sanctions due to its support for Russia and its war in Ukraine. Very notably, Israel, during last week's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington, has joined the Board of Peace and will be represented through its foreign minister. So again, it's a bit strange that a country whose prime minister is wanted by the International Criminal Court on war crime charges, including using starvation as a weapon of war, and the very same country that destroyed Gaza and turned it into rubble, is on this Board of Peace.
I think it's also worth spending a bit of time on who's not going to be at this meeting, because there's some pretty key absences, right? Mm-hmm. Traditional U.S. allies like France, Germany, the UK, Canada. Interestingly, Pope Leo declined an invite to this meeting. Why have all of these countries and leaders declined their invites to join?
Tamara, who's not there is perhaps more important than who is there, right? Europe in general, the United States' closest allies, including the United Kingdom, even Germany, which is very pro-Israel when it comes to Gaza, and which is the most important, largest economy in the European Union, is not participating in this Board of Peace. At the same time, the EU is sending an observer representative to the meeting, as are some other European countries. So it seems that Europe is hedging its bets. It wants to not alienate this Board of Peace idea. At the same time, it is sticking to the traditional framework through which the global order has operated, which is the United Nations and established international agencies, versus giving in to a body where Trump has appointed himself a chairman for life, and that does not have clear mechanism as to how it's going to operate and how it's going to approach the world.
And where you can pay $1 billion for permanent membership, right?
Yeah. And Pope Leo, the Holy See, the Vatican, was clear in saying, we have concerns that we want the existing mechanisms through the United Nations to oversee these global events, including the reconstruction and the resolution of the conflict in Gaza. Mm-hmm. So sort of the Pope Leo and the Vatican spelled out what everybody is thinking here.
Obviously, another noticeable absence is any representation of Palestinians. So the prerequisite to reconstruction, technocratic governance as part of this 20-point plan is Hamas fully disarming. And Israel has warned that Hamas has 60 days to disarm, and if it doesn't, the Israeli military will go back to war in the Gaza Strip.
Israel Prime Minister Cabinet Secretary Yossi Fuchs said that according to the plan, Hamas, quote, will have to give up all of its weapons within a 60-day window, even the rifles, which will, quote, be taken away from them entirely.
And Hamas has been refusing to give up arms as long as Israel continues to occupy Gaza. What's the latest that we've heard from Hamas, and how do you think this meeting is going to address that impasse?
Tamara, this is a recurring theme throughout the history of the conflict, where Palestinians are regularly on the menu and almost never at the table, right? Mm-hmm. Now, it's not just Hamas that's not at the table. The Palestinian Authority has been completely sidelined, despite its alliance with the United States and despite its security cooperation with Israel and despite its rejection of armed resistance. And it's almost, we're seeing another episode of that where, let the Palestinians eat cake and we're going to build this futuristic city and we're going to have this board of peace. Again, reality strikes, because although there has been a technocratic Palestinian government in place, it has not taken over the duties of governance in Gaza, even though the Hamas aligned government agencies, we're talking about civil government agencies, right? Like, paving the roads and hygiene and health. Those agencies, they've said, we want the technocratic government to come and take over. We're ready to hand over this governance of Gaza. It hasn't happened. So the reality is Hamas still exists on the ground as a governing force, even though it's saying we're ready to give up our powers of governance. It's still there. And Hamas still exists as an armed force. Now, what is the limit of Hamas's military capabilities after the war? We are not sure. But we've heard Khalid Mash'al say, recently at the Doha Forum, that the issue is not the weapons. The issue is not Hamas's weapons. The issue is making Gaza a livable place. And that Hamas has communicated that view, that it will give up its weapons once the Israeli occupation of Gaza ends and once there is a Palestinian state to defend the Palestinian people. Because what are the guarantees for Palestinians' right to self-defense? So this is going to be a major sticking point going forward. That said, the Americans via Secretary of State Marco Rubio have previously sort of hinted at a possible, off-ramp here, mm-hmm. right? Like that disarmament means that Hamas cannot hold on to weapons that threaten Israel. So there is wiggle room. It's just not happening at the board of peace because the Palestinians are not even at the table.
We'll have more with Ali after the break. So Ali, you mentioned the board of peace was established to oversee this 20-point peace plan for Gaza, but it's expanded its mandate to resolving conflicts around the world. Trump wrote in a post on Truth Social that the board will present a bold vision for the civilians in Gaza and then ultimately far beyond Gaza, all caps, world peace. Don't we already have a world body for that? Talk a bit about the comparisons that are being drawn between this and the UN and why there is so much fear around the way the Board of Peace seems to be trying to rival the UN.
Yeah, the preamble of the charter of this Board of Peace that has been leaked various media outlets starts with like peace building requires pragmatic resolution. Pragmatic. It's not rooted in international law. It's not rooted in existing agencies of the United Nations, which despite all their flaws, and, we could talk for a couple of episodes and then some about the flaws of this existing system, do have a basic level of accountability, transparency, and representation of the people whose affairs they are handling. Whereas you have this Board of Peace that's chaired by Trump for life, not just the next 3 years when he's president. So there's concern that this is Trump dismantling the world order, dismantling the United Nations, shoving aside the existing agencies and existing mechanisms. And this bodes with the way that Trump has pursued policy by saying, I'm the one who's ending conflict. You look at the conflict in Ukraine, another war where Trump has been intimately involved.
Yeah.
So it solidifies an existing American hegemony over world affairs. And the Europeans are skeptical. The Vatican is skeptical. And frankly, many people in the United States who oppose Donald Trump are skeptical. So what is the future of this Board of Peace beyond the Trump administration? That's another question that nobody has an answer to.
So the Europeans are skeptical, and, we've seen them decline to be a part of this whole project. But over the weekend, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave this speech at the Munich Security Conference that was all over my social feeds.
If at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive.
It seemed to be really well received by European leaders. What is the worldview that Marco Rubio outlined, and how does it fit in with this Board of Peace plan?
So Marco Rubio has told the Europeans that we belong together. So in this way, this part was the part that was most well received by the Europeans, because since the start of the Cold War, Europe has looked to the United States for security. And these fears were obviously amplified when Russia invaded Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And a major theme in the Trump movement is that Europe has been suffering from these immigrants who are coming from third world countries, coming specifically from Islamic countries to Islamicize Europe. So Rubio was sending this message of tough love, like no more immigration, we're not going to abandon you, but you're going to have to be more in our image, which is weird because the United States in many ways is more multicultural than Europe. And I think many European governments, including the center left, which, political spectrums have moved all over the place nowadays, they're willing to take these American diktats to stay under this American security umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
And a core issue here is that the European Union and the United Kingdom, Europe in general, is not ready to be abandoned by Europe. All the talk of European autonomy, all the talk of building up their own military resources in Germany and France, they're still addicted to this American protection. And they're willing to go along with him as long as they hear Rubio's assurances that we belong together.
And Rubio, in the speech, he was actually pretty explicit about this UN comparison. He said it still has tremendous potential, but the UN could not solve the war in Gaza. It has not solved the war in Ukraine. So they seem to be being pretty explicit about the goal of the Board of Peace here.
No, absolutely. But also, we need to point out the sort of inconsistencies here. Why couldn't the UN solve the war in Gaza? It's because of American vetoes at the UN Security Council saying you can't have a ceasefire, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was covering the General Assembly. And this was asked repeatedly to the spokesperson of the Secretary General. You failed. Look at what's going on in Gaza. Look at what's going on in Ukraine. And the answer is, like, yeah, we failed, but because the member states failed, not because we failed. The United Nations still does important work, still delivers aid, still has envoys to many conflicts that facilitate negotiations and peace talks. The problem with the failure of the United Nations is the American veto when it comes to Gaza that prevented a ceasefire.
I'm glad you pointed out those inconsistencies. Okay, so Ali, as we've talked about, this is all happening really far away from Gaza. And I want to bring the conversation back and end there. So during Davos, we talked to our colleague, Madame Hamadeh, and she said that when she hears about the Board of Peace, it sounds like another planet where people in Gaza are on one planet and these plans are in another. And I know you've been talking to people in Gaza and you're in Washington. So how do you sort of connect these two worlds?
They're not connectable, is the answer. Unless we see a drastic change with this vision to what peace in the region looks like and move on from crypto investment and futuristic skyscrapers to answering the needs of the local population, starting with the most immediate needs, food, shelter, medical supplies, to long-term and medium-term needs, sustainability, reconstruction, sovereignty, accountability. These things are just going to remain in two separate worlds. And you may see some sort of project come out of this $5 billion of funding, but it's going to be a Band-Aid, right? And Tamara, it's not just Gaza we're talking about. Yeah, of course, in Gaza, it's the most acute and noticeable and visible and heartbreaking. But in the West Bank, any notion of Palestinian self-determination is being done away with this intensified annexation process. It's a process. It's not a decision, by the way. And it's ongoing and it's intensifying. In Syria, Israeli troops just waltz in, set up checkpoints, kidnap people with no accountability. In Lebanon, they're bombing people daily. They're preventing tens of thousands of people in South Lebanon to return to their villages, which has been Gazafied. And I hate to use Gaza because Gaza is a beautiful place. I hate to use it in this sense. But yes, multiple villages in South Lebanon have been turned into dust. And Israel is bombing cement factories, is bombing bulldozers to prevent the reconstruction of these places. So you have on the one hand, Trump talking about peace for the first time in 3,000 years. On the other hand, people across the region suffering with no accountability and with no end in sight.
Ali Harb, thank you so much for helping us make sense of all of this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tamara.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Sonia Bhagat and Melanie Marich, with Surreal Khalili, Maya Hamadeh, Tuleen Barakat, and me, Tamara Khandaker. It was edited by Alexandra Locke. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Our video editors are Hisham Abu Salah and Mohannad al-Melhem. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.